Hi, today we're going to be talking about how you can centralize authentication for Cloud SQL for SQL Server using a service called Managed Microsoft Active Directory. We're going to cover three topics today. First, we're going to talk about why now is the time to move your databases over to Cloud SQL for SQL Server, which is a managed database service. We're going to talk about a service called Managed Microsoft Active Directory, which integrates with Cloud SQL to allow you to authenticate to Cloud SQL using Windows authentication. And then finally, we're going to demo how these two services work together to create a seamless authentication experience. First, a little bit about us. My name is Isabella Lubin, and I'm a product manager here at Google Cloud, focused on Cloud SQL for SQL Server.
My name is Muthu. I'm here a product manager for Managed CD.
Hi, I'm Ashrit, and I'm a software engineer working on managed AD of Google Cloud.
So first, let's talk about Cloud SQL for SQL Server. Cloud SQL for SQL Server is a fully managed database service. It makes it really easy for you to run your databases here in Google Cloud with a seamless setup, maintenance, and administration experience. Cloud SQL allows you to lift and shift SQL Server because it's a fully compatible service. It works easily with Microsoft SQL Server and with the tools that you're already leveraging to manage SQL Server, including SQL Server Management Studio. But at the same time, it's a fully managed service. So a lot of the pain and toil that you have to have right now for handling backups, replication, patches, and updates, Cloud SQL handles that for you. So while it's a compatible service, we're going to handle the maintenance that takes away a lot of the time that your database administrators are spending. And furthermore, we build reliability and availability into the service. So those features that you need for high availability are really, really easy for you to set up and leverage. Now, a lot of our customers worry that moving to a managed service means that they're giving away a lot of the control that they previously had on premises. Cloud SQL for SQL Server gives you a lot of flexible configuration options so that even though it's a managed service, you get to decide how your SQL Server will work. For example, we support instances of up to 96 vCPUs with 624 gigabytes of RAM and a 64 terabyte SSD. There are a lot of automations that you can enable right when you create your Cloud SQL instance. So you can ensure that storage is automatically increased so that as your database grows, your instance grows as well. You can enable automated backups by default, and those backups will take place on a daily basis at a time that you designate, so that you can always have a copy of your database in case you need to go back. If you need more frequent backups, you can also take backups on demand. High availability, as I mentioned before, is built into the service. If you need high availability, you can select regional availability, and a replica of your primary instance is going to be created in another zone. If a disaster occurs, and for some reason that primary instance is no longer available, Cloud SQL will automatically fail over to that secondary instance, ensuring that your application remains up. And finally, you have a lot of control over the maintenance day and time when Cloud SQL is going to perform those maintenance events, so that you can ensure that when maintenance actually happens, it doesn't disrupt your application or your users. We're continually building new features into Cloud SQL for SQL Server, and I want to highlight just a few of the ones here. First of all, as I said before, we're constantly trying to ensure that maintenance is minimally disruptive to your users and to your application. So we're continually shortening the maintenance event duration and giving you more and more controls over when that maintenance event is going to happen, and the ability to defer or set deny periods on that maintenance event when you have a critical period for your application where it can't take a maintenance event. Additionally, we're building more and more self-service controls for you so that you can ensure that your Cloud SQL instance works the way that you want it to. For example, we just released cross-region read replicas. Cross-region read replicas allows you to scale out your Cloud SQL instance with replicas either in the same region or in other regions so that you can serve reads from instances other than the primary and offload some of those read workloads. But you can also promote those read replicas. So in a disaster, you can create a replica to be in another region, and you can go and promote that replica to be its own standalone instance. A lot of releases have been coming in the last year, and we're really just getting started. More and more are coming every day with every month. Now, we know that authentication is critical. And while a lot of our customers are using SQL Server authentication, a lot of our customers are also using Windows authentication, which is a mechanism that they may have been using on premises. Cloud SQL for SQL Server enables Windows authentication through a service called Managed Microsoft Active Directory, which is another fully managed service that lets you run Active Directory here on Google Cloud. And to share a little bit more about Managed Microsoft Active Directory, I want to hand it over to Muthu.
Thank you, Isabella. Let's now look at the managed AD service. Just like Cloud SQL, this is again a highly available managed service. That means just no hardware management for you, patching or DR planning overheads. This is just 100% Microsoft AD Active Directory running on cloud, which you can use to support your AD-aware workloads running here on Google Cloud. You can extend your on-premises domain just using cross-forest rest. That means your users can now seamlessly sign into Windows workloads that you have deployed in Google Cloud. You can also extend to any region that you would wish to very simply just by selecting the region as well. And hence it's a multi-region resilient deployment as well. This is an area where we are continuing to invest, and here are some of the recent releases that we had in the last year. Of course, the highlight being the cross-project SQL Server, where we have the now the SQL Server customers can actually enable Windows authentication using a domain that is located in a different project as well. The underlying foundation for it is the domain peering, which is also published so that managed AD can also be made available to other workloads running on cross projects or non-domain projects as well. We already support automated backups that happens every 12 hours, but now we also have a feature to create on-demand backups. This is now in the preview mode, so that you can create backups also additionally when you need, and you can restore when needed as well. Managed AD support tags, which means applying policies across multiple domains is now simplified, and you can simultaneously do that for all the domains that have the same tags. With that, let me invite my colleague Asrit to walk us through the demo of how these two managed services come together seamlessly to give you the power of Windows authentication.
Thanks, Muthu. So in this demo today, we will be covering 5 steps. The first step involves creating a managed AD instance. And then on an existing on-prem setup, we will be creating a trust back to our managed AD. We will move on to create a Cloud SQL instance, which has with the Windows authentication enabled on the managed AD. And then we will create logins for the existing on-prem users in the Cloud SQL. And then finally, we will be logging in using that on-prem users. So the first step involved in creating a managed AD instance. You go to the security home page and then go to managed AD, create a new AD domain. Here I'm going to be using a FQDN of demo.org and selecting Cloud SQL test VPC on the domain. So in this scenario, we have selected a normal VPC, but you can always authorize a shared VPC, and that opens to the advantages of shared VPC, like the possibility of having SQL instances on one of the service project. I'm selecting the US West 1 region. You can add multiple regions too. It typically takes about 60 minutes for the managed AD to be created. You can track the creation of the AD in the top right, as well as on the managed AD page. The domain is in unhealthy state right now because it's not yet moved to the ready state. Right, so the domain is in ready state right now. If you click on the domain, you will find that one region has been added and the region is in healthy state. The delegated admin which we created was setup admin. You can copy the credentials of the setup admin and make a note of it, which could be used to log into those domain joint VMs. Right. Moving on to the next step, we have an existing on-prem setup with the name of on-prem domain.org. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a trust with the newly created managed AD. Creating this new trust gives me the option of using on-prem, the existing users and existing security groups on my on-prem setup to authenticate to the SQL instance. I provide the FQDN of the managed AD, which is domain.demo.org. I'm going to create a forest trust. For this demo, I'm creating a bidirectional trust, but you can always create a single direction. While creating the trust, you make a note of the trust handshake which has been created. The trust will be created only from the on-prem side. From the managed AD side, we will be using the API provided from the managed AD to create it. So the trust creation has now completed. You can verify that the trust has been created by logging into the PowerShell and then checking the get AD trust. So this command will give you the output of the domain on which the trust has been created. And you can also see that this is a bidirectional trust, and the FQDN is demo.org, which is our managed AD. Now we move on to create the trust from the managed AD side. We provide the on-prem domain name, which is on-prem demo.org. And again, for this demo, we will be creating a bidirectional trust, but you can always create a one-way outbound trust. We provide the trust handshake as well as the DNS server IPs for the on-prem. The DNS server IPs which has been provided will be added as the DNS conditional forwarders in the managed AD domain controllers. Once the trust has been created, validating the trust always helps you to avoid entering the password again and again. As you can see, the trust has been created. We always maintain a note of the trust created for a managed AD domain on the domain page. And then the state of the trust is also tracked. And as you can see, it's in active state. We wait for the trust to be validated. And once the trust has been validated, now we have created a connection between your on-prem and your managed AD. So moving on to the SQL instance creation with the Windows authentication. We're going to create a new instance of SQL Server. You provide the name of the instance which you want to create. The password which you provide here will be used to create a default SQL Server user. So the two important things which you have to keep in mind is when you're creating a connection, we have to select the private IP to enable the Windows authentication. When you select the private IP, you will be given an option to select the VPC. In this case, it has to be the VPC on which the managed AD was authorized. In our case, it was Cloud SQL test. Post selecting the private IP, you need to select the authentication. In the authentication, it will list all the domains which can be used to authenticate. In our case, it's the demo.org. We wait for the instance to be created. In this scenario, the domain and the SQL instances were on the same project. But with the latest feature, you can always authenticate a SQL instance with a managed AD in a different project. You will also have to create a domain peering in that scenario. Once the Cloud SQL instance has been created, you can always check on the page if that it has been joined to the Active Directory demo.org. If you click on the demo.org, it takes you to the domain page. And on the domain page, you can make a note that the Cloud SQL integration starts showing up. On the page of Cloud SQL, you can make a note of the ways to connect with the Cloud SQL instance. In our scenario, we are going to select the Cloud SQL proxy. Along with that, you can also make a note of the default user which has been created, which is the Cloud SQL Server. Make a note of the password, which will be used to create the logins for the Windows users. Moving on, we have a VM which has been domain joined to the managed AD demo.org with the delegated admin setup admin. We are going to open the Microsoft SQL Server management using the on-prem user. Creating the trust enabled us to use the on-prem user on a VM which was domain joined with managed AD. Before we do a Windows authentication using the on-prem user, we have to create a login on the SQL Server. To create a login, you can use the proxy which was displayed on the SQL instance page. Select the SQL Server authentication, use the default user which was created, and log in to the SQL instance. Once you log in, you create a Windows SQL Server login for the on-prem user. Once the login has been created, you can go ahead and do a Windows authentication. Let's just try doing that. The management tool was logged in using the on-prem user, as you can see here. And once I select Windows authentication, this time I'll be able to authenticate into the SQL Server. There you go. We are inside the instance now. You can just verify that the instance has been created using the on-prem user. Along with the on-prem user, you can always use a security group or any user on the managed AD too. That's it for the demo today. Thank you. Handing over to Muthu.
Thank you, Asrat. Thank you for walking us through the demo. Authentication is critical. And we know a lot of you have been asking for Windows authentication for your SQL Server. That's exactly what we saw today on how we have simplified this setup for you so that you don't have to worry spending a lot of time and effort in setting up your Windows authentication for SQL Server. Instead, get it up and running very quickly with a managed service, and you can directly move on to using your SQL Server. What more, we also have a lot of links, curated links that we have put together in the description to get you started right away. Thank you, everyone.